A statement that two ratios are equal is a proportion. A proportion is a special type of equation. This is a proportion. 2/3 is equal to 12/18. Or we can say 2 is to 3 as 12 is to 18. This is also a proportion, but it is false. 4/5 is equal to 9/10. Turns out that 4 is to 5 is not the same as 9 is to 10. This is an equation, but it is not a proportion. On the left side of our equation is a ratio, but on the right side we have a ratio plus an integer. And since the entire right side is not a ratio, it's not a proportion, but it is an equation. And this is a proportion. It is not true or false. It can be solved for n so that it is true. And we're going to solve this proportion now. We're going to use a quick way that works for many proportions, especially ones that involve integer solutions. We look at this proportion and we see that the 6 in the denominator on the left side goes into the 24, the denominator on the right side. We all know that 6 times 4 is 24. So we multiply that entire ratio by 4/4. We're allowed to do that because 4/4 is equal to 1, and we're applying the multiplicative identity property. So since 6 times 4 is equal to 24, then 5 times 4 is equal to n, so n is equal to 20. And we can say that 5 is to 6 as 20 is to 24. And here's another proportion. 24/56 is equal to 3/n. And in this time, we'll do 24 divided by 8 to get 3. So then we'll do 56 divided by 8 to get n. And just as you can multiply anything by 1 without changing it, you can divide by 1 without changing a number. So 56 divided by 8 is 7, so n is equal to 7. So we can say that 24 is to 56 as 3 is to 7. And that brings us to the means extremes property. In a proportion, the product of the means is equal to the product of the extremes. Or, for real numbers a, b, c, and d, where b and d do not equal 0, if a over b is equal to c over d, then ad is equal to bc. Some people call this cross multiplying. But let's define what the means and the extremes are. We're looking at the proportion a over b is equal to c over d. The red variables, the a and the d, are the extremes, and the blue variables, the b and the c, are the means. So when we cross multiply, we get a times d is equal to b times c. Well, let's apply it on this proportion that we found to be true earlier. That gives us 2 times 18 is equal to 3 times 12, which is 36 is equal to 36, which of course is true. And let's apply our property on the false equation. We circle so we get the product of the means and the product of the extremes. 4 times 10 is equal to 5 times 9, but of course that's false. 40 does not equal 45, and that's why that proportion was false in the first place. Well, now we're going to use the means extremes property to solve a proportion we've already solved. By cross multiplying, we get 6 times n is equal to 5 times 24. And if 6 times n is equal to 5 times 24, if you know anything about the inverse operation, we know that 5 times 24 divided by 6 will give us n. So we're going to do that. And we're going to do it by hand this time because 6 goes into 24, and we can cancel, and we get that 5 times 4 is 20, so n is equal to 20. And now let's solve that other proportion. Our cross multiplying gives us 24n equals 56 times 3. So n is equal to 56 times 3 divided by 24. I move it over to the left because I'm going to need a little more space with this one. The 3 and the 24 are both divisible by 3. So 3 divided by itself is 1, and 24 divided by 3 is 8. And now we recopy it over here on the right because the 56 and the 8 are both divisible by 8. And 8 divided by itself is 1, and 56 divided by 8 is 7. So all we have left on the right side is 7 times 1 on the top and just a 1 on the bottom. And 7 times 1 is 7, and 7 over 1 is still 7, so n equals 7. But the means extremes property really comes in handy when the solutions aren't integers. As you can see in this proportion, 5 does not go into 32. So we'll apply our property giving us that 5n is equal to 2 times 32. So n is equal to 2 times 32 over 5. We'll get out our calculator. 2 times 32 is 64, and the calculator tells us that 64 divided by 5 is 12.8. So 2 is to 5 as 12.8 is to 32. Here's x over 9 is equal to 12 over 25. We cross multiply, and that gives us 25x is equal to 9 times 12. Then x is equal to 9 times 12 over 25. And we're going to use a calculator on this. We do 9 times 12, get a product, divide that by 25, and our solution is 4.32. Here's 8 over x is equal to 42 over 11. We cross multiply, we get 42x equals 8 times 11. And then x is equal to 8 times 11 over 42. Well, I can do the top part in my head. I get 88 over 42. But when I used a calculator, I got a long decimal. So I decided not to go with that to get an exact answer. And 8 and 42 are both divisible by 2. 8 divided by 2 is 4, and 42 divided by 2 is 21. So now I have 4 times 11 is 44, and I get x is 44/21. It's the exact answer, and rather than write a long repeating decimal or have to round it off, I'll stick with the exact answer, 44 over 21. And here's one full of decimals, and we'll use our means extremes property. We get 4.75n equals 3.5 times 8.25. That gives us that n is equal to 3.5 times 8.25 divided by 4.75. We'll get out the calculator, and we get this long decimal. We can't even tell where it repeats. So we'll round it off to the nearest hundredth, but that's a rounded off answer. But then with the help of our calculator, we converted that long decimal, and we got that the entire number is 231 over 38. And if you like mixed numbers, that's 6 and 3/38. So for this proportion, we've written it, rounded off to the nearest hundredth. The exact answer expressed as an improper fraction, 231 over 38, and the mixed number 6 and 3/38. A statement that two ratios are equal is a proportion. A proportion is a special type of equation. In the above proportion, B and C are called the means, and A and D are called the extremes. And here's the means extremes property. In a proportion, the product of the means is equal to the product of the extremes, or for real numbers A, B, C, and D, where B and D do not equal 0, if A over B is equal to C over D, then A times D is equal to B times C.